recording.
All right, there you go. All righty. So welcome to this author conversation that we're having at the Thomas Balch Library. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome our guest today. Ellen Crosby is the author of the Virginia Wine Country Mysteries, set in the heart of affluent horse and hunt country, a region of rolling hills, winding country roads lined by stone walls, trees, and pretty villages. Crosby has also written two mysteries featuring international photojournalist Sophie Medina and a standalone mystery, Moscow Nights. Earlier in her career, Crosby worked as a freelance reporter for the Washington Post, was Moscow correspondent for ABC Radio News, and served as an economist of the U.S. Senate. After living overseas in a variety of places, England, France, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, and the former Soviet Union, Crosby, who has an undergraduate degree in political science from Catholic University and a master's in international affairs from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, now lives in the DC suburbs of Northern Virginia. And today, the impetus for this conversation is her most recent book, The French Paradox. And we're going to be talking about that. Anyone who is listening here, this is going to be recorded and made available. If you have questions to ask, please type them in the chat box. And periodically throughout our conversation today, Laura Christensen, curator of manuscripts here at the Library of Virginia, at the Thomas Balch Library, sorry, I worked there one time, will interject the questions. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and welcome, Ellen. My pleasure, my honor to have you here.
Thank you. I love coming to the Balch Library. This is the first time we've done it in your office, in my office.
That is correct, in my office.
Yes, and mine.
In your office as well. It's usually in the library, and we hope to be able to resume the in-person events in spring of 2022, assuming everyone gets past the pandemic. So this is an adventure for us in these virtual events, and we hope that you enjoy it. So Ellen, your books reflect in-depth research and an accuracy of place and time. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching prior to beginning a book?
I spend a lot of time doing research, actually, and when I could, I always used to start all of my before I started writing any book, I always used to go to the library, and my library is a little further west than you. I went to the Reston Regional Library in Fairfax County, and I started my research there because you find, especially in a library, you find all the old books and sort of books that have been out of print and everything, and you find a lot of really interesting resources. So I do that. But as you mentioned, I have a background as a journalist, so getting it right is really important to me. And I think I believe it's really important to the people who read my books, to my fans, because they care about, I get so many comments about the fact that I am so careful in my research. And I think I owe it to my readers to get it right. So what I tend to do is I'll start and I sort of organize the book. I do some reading, I organize the book, I kind of figure out the plot. And then I figure out who I would need to talk to, because that, for me, that's the fun part, is talking to experts, going places, you know, actually being in some of the places where the books are set when I can, to get all of the sort of the sensory information and what it's like to be there, things that you would miss if you just Googled it, for example. So I do my research, and usually by the time I talk to sort of the big experts who have been willing to help me, and I've had some wonderful help over the years, by that time I'm really trying to ask them the smart questions, that I've done all the basic background research and I've done my homework, and that they're giving me, you know, they're giving me sort of little insights that I wouldn't get otherwise, and everything from jargon to just stories, and you know, that they tell. And so it's kind of an ongoing thing. I write, I research, oh, I need to talk to so-and-so, so I'll call this person and get help with a particular part of the plot that I'm working on. So I do it like that. But so it's kind of an ongoing part of my writing, and I really love it. You know me, I've been to the Balch Library, and you've helped me with you know, with explaining all the ins and outs of the library for an earlier book that I wrote, and that I really enjoyed that part of it. I learned something, and I think my readers learned something too.
So you have authored 3 different styles of mysteries. A rather dark mystery set around journalism, The Moscow Nights.
Mhm.
A second series, which I happen to enjoy very much, featuring a globetrotting photojournalist, Sophie Medina mystery series.
I love
And of
this.
course, the Wine Country mystery series, of
Right.
which The French Paradox is the 11th.
Right.
All 3 are different. In what way do you think these different styles are reflective of your career as a journalist for major networks and an economist at the U.S. Senate?
Okay, so Moscow Nights started out what I wanted to write was a nonfiction book about the time we spent in the Soviet Union. And I tried and tried and tried, and finally, this is many years ago, this would have been in the 90s, I think. There was an agent in New York who wrote me back, and she said, honey, everybody's writing about the Soviet Union, the fall of the Soviet Union. Just make it up, write a story. And I thought, all right, I'll write a novel. So we moved to London after that, and that's where I wrote Moscow Nights, and it was fairly recent after we had returned from the Soviet Union. So a lot of it was fresh in my mind, and I'd kept journals and everything else. So I wrote that book, and that got published. And to me, that was sort of, I would say, the book of my heart. That was so much of my journal was in that book, the incidents that happened, and a lot of the story was sort of my kind of like my love affair with the time we spent in Russia, which was just absolutely fascinating. And so then I was in London, and we had gone home on home leave to back to the United States for the summer, and a friend of ours had taken us around to the Virginia vineyards because my husband's French, and I know I've told this story multiple times when I've been at the library, but we lived in France at one point, and we used to visit all the French vineyards. So this friend thought we should see the Virginia vineyards, and we did this tour. And I got back to London, and my agent, my British agent, was talking to me about, she said, well, what are you going to do after your Moscow Nights comes out? What's your next project? And I said, well, I'd really like to write a book that sort of mines all my foreign experience, my international experience. And she said, and I had told her about the trip to the vineyard. She said, I think you should write about that vineyard book, write the vineyard book. And I said, well, I really do want to write a book with a foreign setting. And she said to me, you live in England, Virginia is a foreign setting. And it's kind of hard to argue with that. So I told her, I said, all right, I will write one. And that was always my intention. And then I was going to go back to an international setting. And here I am, I'm actually finishing up number 12. They became, people really liked them. When I got back to the States, I had an American agent who said to me, this really has to be a series. And sold it to Scribner. And at that point, they just kept asking for more books. So I did 6. And, I'd only started out to write the 1. And it was a small setting, and I got to the point where everybody knew once you started another book, you knew who didn't done it. And the whodunits were sort of like the new characters who were introduced. It was just harder and harder to play fair with my readers. And I just felt like I needed to take a break and step back. And so that's when I went back to like you said, the other book, the one that's sort of my roots, which is The International Journalist. And I wrote 2 of those, and I really loved them. But I got picked up by another publisher, and they said, hey, we like the wine books. So I went back to that. So I'm with the 3rd publisher, and they want the wine books as well. So, I like writing them. What's kept me going in the wine series is the history. And as I wrote more and more books, I began to realize there was so much history in Virginia. And I'm a New Englander. I was born in Boston and raised in Connecticut. And so I just really got into the history. And there's between Washington, D.C., the War of 1812, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, Prohibition, all kinds of stuff, reenacting, Jackie Kennedy. The one that I'm writing now, the Confederate Monuments, which is my 3rd rail book. Yeah.
So you'll be on our agenda coming up in another year, right?
Yeah, I hope so. So the history is what I really love. And then every so often I'll get an email from somebody who'll say, we were traveling to Virginia this year because of your books, and we want to visit the places that you've written about. And I love that. That is just such a compliment to me. I really think it's great. Plus, people say, you forced me to look something up. And sort of the mom in me is like, oh, good, somebody, I've got somebody looking something up. So I like teaching, I think, or having people learn like the spoonful of sugar, like sugaring the pill or whatever. So I enjoy that.
So in all of the books that you've written, titles are often, for better or for worse, the catch that draws people into a book or puts them off. How do you come up with the titles for your book?
Oh, okay. Had I but known, I may not have called the first book The Merlot Murders, because that ended up informing the rest of the series for a long time. It was once I did that, my editor at Pocket, who did the paperbacks for the Scribner hardcovers, she was the editorial director. She was the number 2, and she said to me, "They all have to have alliterative titles, Ellen." And I said, "Seriously?" And she said, "If 1 for the money and 2 for whatever, and for the Jan Ivanovich, and the A is for alibi and B is for burglar." She said, "Your thing is going to be wine." She said, "That's how it's going to stick in people's minds." And a lot of this is marketing. And I've actually had titles changed by my editor and by the publisher, because they believe they don't like, for example, the Viognier Vendetta, which was one of the books. When Pocket bought the book from Scribner, the publisher said, "No one's going to be able to pronounce the word Viognier, and it's too complicated." Seriously. And she actually, the direct quote is, "Middle America is not ready for a book with Viognier in the title." And the number of people who wrote after that and said, "She really introduced me to a new wine." But so they called it the Vintage Vendetta. So, and they said to me, I know, which confused everybody, as it would, because it wasn't like a Canadian book and an American book, or a British book and an American book. It was 2 American books. And my agent kept saying, you're just gonna confuse everybody. And they said, "Do you like it?" And the right answer is yes, because even if you don't like it, they're gonna do it. And so authors get, a certain amount of say, but if it doesn't work for the publisher, you're gonna hear about it, because they have people who do marketing and public relations, and the book jacket. I mean, people ask me all the time about the book jacket. In my contract, there's a clause that says you get cover, not approval exactly, but you get to see it, I guess, in advance. And usually when you see it, they say, "Do you like it?" And the right answer to that is also yes. Because one time I said, "You get the wrong wine on the cover." And she said, "That's the way it is." And, she said, "We're just not going to change it." Another time I had my favorite instance was the second book came out, the Chardonnay Charade came out, this was years ago. And Scribner had put on the Merlot Murders, if you look at the covers that I have now for those books, they had something in the middle. They had they call it spot art, but it was an M, and it was for Montgomery Estate Vineyard. And so for the second book, they wanted the same format. They had vines around the frame, and then they had kind of a photography kind of a cover, and then they had the spot art in the middle, and they had a flashlight, which was germane to the plot. And I looked at it, and it's just kind of like hanging in the middle of the air. And I thought, and so I talked to my publisher, and I said, and I showed it to my family, and my kids were living home then. And my son said, "Mom, what is the space shuttle doing in the middle of your book?" And so I told them that, and they changed it. And so after that, it went to, there's an M on all of, and that spot art just became the M. And there was no more trying to put like an object that was part of the plot as the spot art. So it just was the M. So, so you have some say, you get to make comments about things. I got Sophie's hair changed one time. I mean, they had her as a blonde, and I said, "She's a brunette. She's half Hispanic. She's definitely not a blonde." And so they changed her hair. But yeah, so.
So in writing your books, this is something that sort of interests me. What comes first, the plot or the characters? And have you ever had to change either of these midstream in writing a book? Say in the storyline, the characters develop in ways that change your conceptualization of the plot. In other words, do the characters sometimes control the plot, or does the plot control the characters?
Well, first of all, I want to try to remember all the things that I want to tell you, because first of all, if you think of the books you loved, you never think of the setting, you think of the characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the characters are really important. What I started out writing, though, like with Moscow Nights and even with the Virginia Vineyards, was I love place. So setting has always been really important to me. The plot for but increasingly the characters have become more important. But I have to, I'm in at least in the mystery world, we have two kinds of writers. We're called plotters and pantsers. Have I ever told you about that?
Mm-mm.
A plotter is somebody who organizes the book. They know where it's going, and I'm a plotter. A pantser, P-A-N-T-S-E-R, is the person who writes by the seat of their pants. And it's just known. And so at every mystery conference you go to, somebody will say plotter or pantser, and everybody knows what that means. And the most surprising people, the most organized people are pantsers. And I just can't fathom that. I just interviewed Cara Black for the Virginia Book Festival, and she wrote this wonderful book called 3 Hours in Paris. And it's a detailed timeline of a plot to assassinate Hitler. And she wrote by the seat of her pants. I said, how? So I organize everything. And I'm very, I took a screenwriting class in London many years ago. It was a wonderful, wonderful class. 3 days, just 12-hour days, and just brilliant. And one of the things that I learned is that, you know, to write in scenes. So every book that I write out the scene for that book, and I have like a Bible. And so I'll know what's, you know, and I'll know what chapter it is, and I'll know what time of day it is to make sure I don't get things mixed up. I'll know what day it is. And it really helps me when the copy editor comes around a year later and I'm writing another book to say, was that a Tuesday, or, you know, what day, what you know, didn't it rain already? So I'm very organized. But what I do is, at the end of the day, if what I wrote doesn't match what was on my outline, I change the outline. And then so I know that it's, you know, I know it's going to all hang together. And I'm doing that a lot right now on the book for next year, because it's just changing pretty much. I mean, I wrote a scene yesterday that I never expected to write, and I realized it's going to have this domino effect the whole way through. So I had to go back through my little, you know, spreadsheet, as it were, and fix everything. And I'm constantly, you know, changing chapters. Like, you know, this chapter would be better ending here, because I like to end with a cliffhanger. I want you have to turn the page. There's no going to sleep when you're reading the book. You have to turn the page, and that's my goal, is to keep everybody up all night reading. So
well, you did me when I was reading The French Paradox.
Thank you.
I read through in one sitting.
Thanks.
And I missed getting to sleep that night.
Yeah, thank you.
So along with the speaking about the characters, I'm curious how you keep your characteristics stylistically consistent from one adventure to the next. For instance, Thelma Johnson, a character I just love, seems to be, I mean, she's really a character. She shines through in every book that you've written, and you know who she is. How do you manage that?
Not always as well as you might think, but thank you for the compliment. Because don't forget, I took off a couple of years between this book number 6 and book number 7. I had to go back and reread my series, and I did take notes. I was very lucky early on, until about 2 or 3 books ago, to have the most wonderful copy editor ever, and she's the one who kept the character Bible for me. And then, you know, so I'd write something, and she wrote these little snarky, when she would copy it, and I get these little snarky comments in the margins. And this was in the days when drafts were mailed and everything wasn't sent as a document. And she'd say, did somebody get a new car? Or, you know, did we change the color of their eyes? And she knew all that stuff. So I know I've done some things. I think I might have given somebody like 2 different last names, you know, and stuff like that. But people seem to be pretty forgiving. But I do try. I mean, every character should be a strong enough person, or, you know, to stand on their own, that they should have their own distinct traits, and the way they talk and what they do. I mean, I've changed her brother, Lucie's brother, quite a lot through the book. I mean, he went from being, you know, he was sort of a cad in the beginning. He married this trophy wife, and the marriage fell apart, and then gradually he and Lucie became closer and closer. And so he's changed a lot, and now he's working. He's got his architecture studio in the carriage house on their property, and he just built a house also on the property for his family. And but I try to make them, you know, grow and have problems, and just be real people, not be static. Not many years has passed in the book in the series since I started it, maybe about half a dozen years. So, but I still want them to evolve, you know, and to have a history.
Do you have a favorite character?
Um,
Is there one that you've created that is a favorite for you?
I like Thelma. I mean, she's a minor character. I know she'll appear in every book. Um, it's
Except she's not really minor. She really stands out, and you can get this visual of her as
yeah,
if you're looking at a movie.
yeah. Thank you. Well, I love Lucy. I like, I do.
True.
And I just never expected that I would be living so long with her, and one of the things that's been interesting about that, and I've also told this story, is that when I started writing these books, it would have been again in the late 90s. So that's like over 20 years ago. I'm 20 years older, more than 20 years, and Lucy is not. So early on, I was a lot closer in age to Lucy than I am now. I have to go back to my daughters-in-law and say, would you do that? Would you say that? Like, how do you respond to that? Because I'm just so far away from her age. And, but I, I like her. I do. I really do. I like Quinn too. I like, he's, Juanita Swedenborg was when we first started the series, and she was helping me out. She's since passed away, but she was her vineyard in Middleburg was sort of the inspiration for the series on Route 50. And she said to me, "Why did you make a winemaker from California? You never should have done that." I said, "I did, I mean, live with it." But I found that his California roots have given the story a lot of, have given their relationship a lot of its spark, I think. So I'm really glad I did.
So have you created a character in your series that you really don't like?
When we talked about these questions in advance. When I wrote the first book, I created a lot of characters I never thought I'd have to live with, and I have gradually killed them off. They have disappeared. Like, her sister disappeared until the last book, until The French Paradox. She disappeared after, I think, 2 books, and I finally brought her back because I thought, well, okay, she could, I could see her coming back. And then Lucy's cousin had a boyfriend, and I got rid of him. I mean, Eli had a wife and I dumped her. And so there you can just do these things, when you're creating your own little world. So it's not that I didn't like them, it's just that they didn't serve the purpose, I think, of the story. And there were so many more interesting characters I could bring in, again, once I realized I was really building this world. I mean, my arc was so small, and now it's much bigger. So I'm thinking, a few books out, like what could happen, and planting some seeds and things like that.
So in reference to the French Paradox, which you've just written, often you read disclaimers that characters in a book are fictional and a product of the author's imagination. What, if any, difficulties did you encounter in introducing a well-known figure such as Jacqueline Kennedy into this book?
Well, my publishers in England and the libel laws in Britain are much, much stricter than they are in America. And I wondered about that as well. And I think, it's almost like, well, Jackie Kennedy's a historic figure now, and so is Marie Antoinette. What's the difference? Is that Marie Antoinette lived in the hundreds of years ago. Jackie Kennedy still has a family Caroline's very careful about her mother's legacy, and I think all of her letters are still sealed, and that sort of thing. But honestly, she was a historical figure. She lived in Middleburg. She spent a lot of time in Middleburg. There is a park to her in Middleburg, dedicated to her. And she was a book editor. I read a wonderful book called Jackie as Editor. I read everything I could get my hands on. She'd written the introduction to this one book that I wrote about, and so I managed to get a copy of that book because I wanted to read what she'd written. So I did a lot of research, and that she had a love affair or a romantic relationship with Lucy's grandfather. He's a fictitious character, so there's just nothing that happened, and then I was able to. I knew I had wanted to write about the National Museum of Women in the Arts, because a friend had suggested that to me as an idea, and I thought that's a really fascinating. Women who've never had their paintings exhibited in museums just because they were women who still painted at the time of the old masters. These women were the old mistresses, and I thought that's just such an intriguing thing to write about. So I wanted to write about that, and then I knew I was going to write about Jackie, and what I didn't know was how I was going to bring them together. And then a friend of mine, Ann Ma, who's also an author, but she's a travel writer as well. She writes for the New York Times. She is her family has a place in France, and she's a huge Francophile. They go there every summer, and she wrote an article for the New York Times on Jackie's junior year abroad in Paris, in 1949 in Paris. And I happened to read it in the paper, and I thought, and she studied art, and she studied, like art history. And I thought I could marry the two subjects that way. And Jackie had edited a book of Marie Antoinette's letters to her mother, Maria Theresa. So, and she already loved everything French and the French courts and, that whole period in French history. So I just invented that Jackie would have bought these paintings in the 1940s when they weren't worth anything, by this portraitist who was famous in her own day but fell out of favor. And now all of a sudden the paintings are worth a fortune, and the National Museum of Women in the Arts is interested in them. So that's how I married the two things together. And I think, whatever I wrote about Jackie, I think I've gotten a couple of reviews. Some people have taken issue with it, but other people have said it's really well researched and really, really, thoughtful, and I learned a lot. And so I think you have to be careful not to demean somebody or damage their reputation or something like that. But there was none, that wasn't the purpose of this book. I think a lot of people didn't know much about her time as a book editor, and I think I gather from what I read, she was really she felt so fulfilled doing that. She loved being a book editor.
Well, I thought it was well placed because of her time in Middleburg, and I was aware of her editing work, so I thought it was fascinating. I just wondered what difficulties you had encountered. Also in this book, as you may know, I am an archivist by profession, and I'm the library director here. But we're dedicated to preserving the historical records that document the past for the future. And although not surprised, I am aware people destroy records pertaining to their life. And I know that you do a great deal of historical research. So I was a little bit professionally distressed to read in the final scenes the destruction of personal correspondence. As an author known for your thorough research, but also one who shredded her own first literary effort, Peace of Mind, how did you come to include destruction of historical documentation in this book?
We talked about this, and I think we should ask the people who are participating to put something in the chat how they feel about it. But I do. All right, you guys, you have to weigh in on this. So should the letters have been destroyed, the love letters have been destroyed, or should they have been kept and put in some kind of an archive for you all to read, like Warren Harding letters were, that I wrote about in another book, and that got him in a packet of trouble. Don't you? Yeah, I mean, he did.
He did.
The Library of Congress finally allowed the letters to be published, and they were pretty racy. I hadn't really thought about that when I did it, but I just she was such a private person, and her grandfather had worked so hard to preserve her, to preserve, to keep, to not exploit what happened to them. And so I think, they were never written intended to be revealed. They were to one person, and I get it. They'd be fascinating. I mean, everybody would gnaw off an arm to read those letters. But I don't know if I told you about this, but somebody found in Richmond, I think it was, the piece of paper in her handwriting where she listed everything she was going to take to Dallas with her, including the Chanel suit and clothes she obviously never got to wear. And they found it, and I think there was like a big kerfuffle over it, and I think they finally ended up giving it to the Kennedy Library. But I mean, every little thing that she did, everybody wanted a piece of her. And there were some letters that she'd written to a priest in Ireland that they were going to, I think, sell to earn some money. And again, the family found out, and they said, please don't do that. They would have raised a lot of money at auction. It was like, please, let us take them and put them in context. And so the not the friary, but the monastery or whoever it was. I think they did that, and they're now in a vault at the Kennedy Library. So I don't know. I'm very curious what people think. Has anybody weighed in the chat?
Not yet.
Oh,
They did. They
what do people think? Can we see?
Let me see if so. We did get one response from Adrian, who said, "I was shocked. I wanted Pepe, am I saying it right, to write his own book."
I'm sorry, what? Oh, Pepe wrote his own book. Oh, really? Okay, okay. Huh. I just don't think he would have done that. I just don't. I think he's in his 90s. He's very old school. He's very, he's from that generation where they didn't do that. And can you just imagine? I mean, would there ever even be anything like this now, Alexandra? I mean, everybody would have tweeted, and that'd be the end of it. Or they would have sent a text with emoticons. And all the beautiful words would be lost. So I think it's, I don't know, but they burned him. They just did. They had a bonfire and they burned him.
So we have another response here.
Okay.
Okay, so we also got a response from Joseph, who said, "As a historian, I was disappointed, but it was clearly the right choice for this book." So you're winning them over.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate that. Okay. Good. So I think, yeah, if I had, I should have, maybe I should have talked to you before I wrote that. I still think I would have burned them. I still think I would have burned them. I think,
And that's a really typical thing. I mean, in my own family, my grandfather had my grandmother burn all their letters, correspondence during World War I when they were courting.
Yeah.
He was in France and she was in the New England states. My father had my mother, and that's another generation down, do the same thing from World War II and Korea. So, and I've seen it many times where that's happened, but you'll see holes, as somebody who's processed manuscript collections where you have somebody's life, there are whole sections that might be missing and you just wonder what it is you don't know about. And then sometimes in one collection that I processed, there was the start of perhaps the breakup of the marriage, but they got back together. And had we had some of that information, it might have made it more realistic and less cut and dry. You might have said, well, but it is extra. It isn't necessarily, it is very private. And I think something that I understand why people do it.
well, this goes back into the book that I wrote on the DNA, which was,
Right.
When Lucy finds out she has a half brother who is in the book I'm writing now, comes back in the book I'm writing now, that, you believe you have the right to privacy and you just never think about this. I mean, I don't know, maybe George Washington and Thomas Jefferson knew that their letters were going to be, their correspondence, well, certainly Jefferson, was going to be saved and was going to be of value. I mean, and which is why he had duplicated everything. But I think a lot of people just never assume that. And of course, those are the things now that mean so much. I mean, I love collecting, old diaries and things like that and reading some of that stuff. I love journals. I especially love ones that are like scrapbooks, and just what people have collected and things like that. I just find that fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So you have a host of friends, among them booksellers and authors. How do other authors help you become a better author?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. And well, first of all, I'm in a critique group, and I have been in critique groups since I moved back to the United States for probably 20 years. One group we called the girls group, and we're still very much in touch. And then for the last 10 years, I'm in a critique group. There's 3 guys and another woman, and Donna Andrews and me. And then John Gilstrap, who's a thriller writer, Alan Orloff, who now lives in Florida, but used to live around the corner from me, who just got nominated for a thriller award for a short story, and he's won awards for his books. And Art Taylor, who's a professor at George Mason and has won every mystery award around for his short stories. So I think and we're the whole spectrum. Donna's very cozy and John's a total thriller writer. And you kind of wondered how we'd all be able how we'd all be able to critique each other's work. And after 10 years, I mean, John keeps saying, I was the one who just really, I wasn't a sharer. I didn't want to, I didn't need any help. I didn't, I just wanted to work with my editor. He said, I wouldn't miss one of these meetings for anything. And in 10 years, we have never missed a month. And in any time we know that there's like everybody's got events, or people have books out or whatever, we schedule an event for the beginning of a certain month and the end of the month and count the last one as the next month that we know we're going to have to miss. But we've never missed a month. And that has been an enormous help. I mean, just help in terms of my development as a writer. We share a lot of professional information. Everybody in the group has been involved held positions of, elected positions in mystery organizations. We've been judges in mystery competitions and, for anthologies, we've been readers. And so I think that's been hugely, hugely helpful. And one of the things that we always say about the mystery community is that we know how to murder anybody. We can kill people. We can do all kinds of havoc, but we are the nicest people ever. And it's the most helpful community. There's a big, big tent in Mysteryland, and everybody just helps each other out. And I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have my network of friends. I belong to Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime and the Thriller Writers. And the networking is so important. And I mean, a friend the other day sent me an email, and he had been let go by his publisher. And he said, I understand you're with a new publisher. What do you think of them? And I said, hey, your books would be perfect for that publisher. And my editor is also the publisher. So I wrote her and I said, are you okay if I write her? They signed a contract with him. And people will do that kind of stuff all the time. Everybody helps everybody. Oh, my agent would, you should talk to my agent. I'll set something up. So it's just a really great community. And a lot of my really dear friends are my writer friends. I can't say enough about it.
So what role does social media play in your life as an author?
Too much. It's some days it's the bane of my existence. And I just, increasingly authors are expected to market as well. I mean, so not only do you have an event in a bookstore, or a library or wherever, but I mean, I also promoted our event on my social media sites. And, but when I'm doing that sort of thing, I'm not writing. And, and that starts to be problematic. And you can do as much marketing and promoting and everything as you want. And we've talked about this in the critique group, and I talk about it with my agent. It's like, does it do any good? I mean, how much good does it do? How much personal stuff do you want to let out there? I'm very private. I'm an introvert. I don't think anybody wants to know what I have for breakfast. My family life is private. So I have to say, I really struggle with it. I tend not to go on social media unless I have an event that I'm promoting. I know some people who are they just do it so well. Like Art Taylor, he's just brilliant at it. He's always he's putting up his own stuff, and he's got a whole big network, and he lets you know about other people's books. And I don't know how he does it. I mean, I really struggle with that. On the other hand, I love photographs. I love photography. So I would say, a very active Instagram page. And it's things like, I love flowers. We have flowers in the house all the time. So there's always things that intrigue me that I'm taking photographs of and posting on Instagram. And some of them are relevant to my books, and some of them are just things I really like. And I find that is kind of like an easier way to express some of myself through a photograph than to sit down and write a blog or something like that. But social media, everybody wants you to do it. And everybody, all the publishers and your editor and everything else, they want you to be part of it. But it is a huge time suck. It is a really, really big time suck. And I find it exhausting as an introvert. By the time I'm done writing a post for something, I'm just like, I really, if I have to write a blog, I know it's going to take me a whole day, because I'm going to sit there and I'm going to change it around, and then I'm going to print it out, and then I'm going to let it go, set it down, and then read it and fix it and tweak it. And some people can just dash it off, and I wish I were one of them, but I am not. I'm just not.
You want it to be an authored event,
Right,
something that's
right.
well written.
I like,
Um,
people who have really good senses of humor and they can just say these witty things. I mean, I think I anybody with a sense of humor, I'm theirs. I just, the world needs more people to make you laugh, I think. So, but I just can't, I just don't have that. I just don't, I admire anybody who does.
So I have a couple more questions I'd like to ask, but if the audience would like to think of any questions they'd like to put in the chat, we can get to those.
Okay.
But here's one of the questions. Of all the books you have written, which is your favorite?
That's like saying which is my favorite child. which of my kids do I love the most? It's always the one I'm writing now. Always. It has to be, because you have to spend a year of your life falling in love with something, and and my husband will be looking at me and he'll say, "What?" And I'll say, "I'm sorry, I'm thinking about my plot." And you just are. I mean, I carry notebooks around with me. One of your questions was like, where do you get your ideas? It's like everywhere. I mean, I just pluck them out of the ether. I mean, just anything is grist for the mill. And I wait a minute now. Can you remind me of the question again?
Oh, it was just which book is your
Which is
favorite?
the favorite? Oh yeah. In I loved all three. I love the wine series. I love the Sophie series, and I love Moscow Nights. I really did like the Sophie series, and I wish I'd been able to write more, but that didn't work out.
Do you think it ever might work out? Do you think you ever might go back to it?
I think it's not a question of me going back to it. I think it's a question of a publisher picking it up, and
This is wonderful. I love those two books.
Thank you. I did too. If I do something else, which I'd kind of like to do, I think I'd go more down that road, actually, and probably with new characters. But I really enjoyed that, and that was, it's something that I know about, that's a world I know. But that said, I think a lot of people enjoy the wine books because I write about a world they don't know, and neither do I. So I have to do the research. But and everybody says I've learned something when I'm done with your books. So I don't know. But I guess the answer is I have to love the book I'm writing right now.
So you write mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a favorite genre for you to read, or do you have a different genre you like to read?
Well, I do read mysteries, but I read a lot of nonfiction. I really like nonfiction. I like history and biography, and just any, sort of really good narrative nonfiction, I think. Something that reads like a novel. And but I read a lot of mysteries, everything from blurbing books to just keeping up with what my friends are doing, to interviewing people. Like I'm interviewing for the Poison Pen in a couple of weeks. I'm interviewing a guy named Steve Mac Jones, who I interviewed at the Virginia Book Festival. So I'm going to get the arc of his books. So the fun part of that is you get books before they're out, and you get to read them early. So I love that. And Tara Black, I just finished reading her book, and I'm reading at the moment the book by the former mayor of New Orleans on the Confederate monuments, and his name just went right out of my head. Mitch Landrieu. So I read a lot of nonfiction, and it's easier actually to read nonfiction when I'm writing fiction.
So places inspire your writing, and obviously you've written about the wine country, and you have another one coming out. But have you ever thought of doing a tour guide, having Lucie do a tour guide that people could use to find the sites you mentioned?
Well, some of them are invented, so it'd be pretty hard. But
it would be a work of fiction. But
I know. No, I haven't. Somebody's asked me if I ever thought of writing a prequel. What I'd love to do is some kind of photo book of of all these places, and sort of put things together, and do something like that. But and I've thought of it.
That's your photojournalism background.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sort of, I dabble in watercolor and stuff like that, but just sort of a combination of something like that. But it would take think it would take a lot. It would take a lot of work. It'd be, I don't know. But yeah, I guess I thought of it, but I haven't really done anything about it yet.
Is there anything in particular that you would like for the audience to know about the French paradox?
Yeah, actually there is. When I was writing the book, One More Page bookstore in Arlington was going through a really bad patch. They had their taxes raised exponentially, and they are in the backyard of where Amazon 2 is going to be. And so they ended up having a charity auction. And one of the things that a lot of mystery authors do is to help with these fundraisers is you donate a character in a book, and people bid on the right to be that character in your book. So I told Eileen, I said, I'll donate a character in my book. And it turned out there was a woman who was determined to win the auction. And her name is Rochelle Zone, but she didn't want it for herself. She wanted it for her friend, Marilyn Gilbert Bernard, who was a librarian with the Fairfax County school system, and she was dying of cancer. And so every time, Eileen said that every time anybody came in and raised the bid on the character, you know, a little bit, like Rochelle would come in and like raise it $100 or something like that. It was the second most expensive item bid on in the whole auction, except for, I think, lunch with the Capitals public relations team after they won the Stanley Cup. So I was very proud of that. So Marilyn had passed away, but I called Rochelle and I asked her to tell me about Marilyn. And she did. She told me that she was a much beloved librarian, and how her students had loved her. She said she kept a Venus flytrap on her desk, which was something that I gave the Marilyn in my book. And she said anytime anybody came in to tell her something that they weren't sure she wanted to hear, she'd look at the Venus flytrap and say, I think my plant hasn't eaten in a couple of weeks, and, you know, get everybody, you know, get the person really nervous. But I ended up making Marilyn the curator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And when I went in, I'd gone into the museum with a friend of mine who's an artist who's on the board, who was the one who had talked to me about this idea. And we went in there right before COVID, and we met the director and the deputy director. And we sat down for coffee with the deputy director. And I said, like, who would my character be? I want these paintings donated to the museum. And what person would that be? She said, oh, it's the curator, for sure. Because I thought it would be the director or the deputy director. She said, no, the curator handles all that, the donations. And she said, we have somebody who's really wonderful. I think you'd love to talk to her. And I said, okay. And she said, well, you know, we'll organize something and you'll do that. So this is February of 2020, last year. So we go home, and that was the last outing I had. The museum closed. And so I emailed Eileen back and I said, do you think I could maybe have a telephone conversation with the curator? And I said, you know, thinking, of course, the museum's closed. They're sitting around with their feet up on the desk, you know, not doing anything. And she wrote me back and she said, you have no idea. She said, we have exhibits that are now stopped, who knows where, paintings, we don't know where they are, art we've been acquiring, stuff we just can't even find it. She said, we're trying to put the brakes on, like, you know, move the Titanic so it doesn't hit the iceberg, pretty much. And she said, we are just flat out busy. So I never got to talk to the curator, but I did get to talk to Rochelle about Marilyn. So when you read the book and you read about Marilyn, that's the backstory. She was apparently a really wonderful person. And Rochelle wrote me afterwards and she said, you got her to a T. She said she was perfect. She would have loved to have been a curator of an art museum.
Do we have any questions?
We do.
We have some questions.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
They aren't in the chat. They might have only been sent to the host.
Aren't they? I think they just came to me privately, so I will read them out to you, and we're getting a few more.
Okay.
So to start with the ones that are specifically about the French paradox,
Okay.
and then we had some more general ones. So one question from Cheryl: if the French paradox was a movie, who would you cast as Lucie and Thelma?
Oh, I think somebody asked me that, and I forget who I picked the girl who played Beth in Little Women, and I can't pronounce her name. Saoirse Ronan, I think it is, for Lucie, and I picked and Thelma. Oh my gosh, I have Betty White. I don't know, so maybe somebody like Betty White.
It's always hard to
Yeah.
narrow it down. Um, so another question we have from Adrian. She says the eye drops was a clever murder weapon. I've never read a book where they're the murder weapon before. Lucy speculates how Harry killed Parker, but Harry never admitted what happened. So I was curious, did she do it with Mia's eye drops or did she have her own bottle?
That is a huge spoiler. Should I really answer that?
It's up to you.
Um, I don't know that I ever connected that. She might have, I think she might have taken her, I think she might have taken Mia's, and that's how she got the idea. But actually what happened was I was reading a story in the newspaper about a woman who had actually killed her husband by using the eye drops that way. And then I just Googled it and it was like, oh, okay. It's more than one person has committed murder with Visine.
Hopefully no more based on this
I
conversation.
know, I know. I always try to leave a few things out.
So another question from Joseph. In developing the character of Cricket, how much were you influenced by the life of Bunny Mellon?
Um, I read the book The Gardens of Bunny Mellon that I bought at the bookstore in Middleburg, which we should talk about, by the way, the second chapter books. I definitely want to bring that up. And she was sort of Bunny Mellon, but they were I made Cricket friends with Bunny Mellon and Jackie as well. So yeah, I definitely think I was influenced by her.
Great. We do have some more general comments and questions. So these are kind of larger ones. One is I'm trying to scroll back up so I can see the name of the nice person who made this comment. It's not cooperating. We don't have a name. Someone definitely put in a vote for having a picture book of your favorite wineries or
Oh,
images inspired by your books.
thank you.
So that's a popular idea.
Okay.
Um, and then we also have a follow-up question. You mentioned at the beginning of the program that your next book would feature Confederate monuments or Confederate statues. Is that a standalone book or another wine series
No,
book?
it's the wine series. It's in the wine series.
We'll look forward to seeing what you do with it.
Yeah,
That'd be excellent.
thank
Okay,
you.
and then one more question, unless anybody wants to add a few more while we're still talking. This one's from Adrienne, and she's been waiting, or they've been waiting patiently. Apologies if I'm just enjoying Adrienne. You mentioned during acknowledgements Lucy Morton being someone who helped you with your research and was the inspiration for the character Julia Wilde, and the reason you named Lucy Lucie Montgomery. Are you also a big Lucy Maud Montgomery and Anne of Green Gables fan?
I've been asked that a couple of times. Not really. No, I mean, I can't believe I have to admit this, but I've never read that book. So it wasn't intentional at all. Um, it was just, I wanted a French name because I wanted the book to be set partially in France. So I gave her the French spelling, which turned out to be the same as Lucy Morton. And then I have no idea why I picked the name Montgomery, none at all. And it might have been subliminally because of Lucy Morton, and it might, because I had read Lucy's book. It's called Wine Growing in the Eastern United States, because there was nothing about, wine growing in this part of the country, except everything was all California. So I found that book in the Reston Library. And then eventually Lucy gave me a copy that she signed to me. That's, so that was sort of the genesis of her name. And then Josie, I told Lucy later when she was helping me the last couple of books, I said, I'm going to create a character who's you. And she said, oh, good. So and there was one where I guess I was going to, what was I going to do? I was going to do something and it involved something a little racy. And she was like, well, that'd be fine with me. So she's been enjoying it. I want to say something about the bookstore too. So for anybody who wants a signed and personalized book, Second Chapter Books in Middleburg is the bookstore for this event, as they have been for all the other events I've done at the library. And there was a slide up earlier. Can we put it up at the end as well?
Yes, we will.
So you can call them. You can email them, you can drop by, but I'll be driving out there, and I will sign and personalize any book that anybody buys. They're offering a 10% discount, and they have books, and we will take care of you. And now, if you want to come by and get the book, you can pick it up. They will mail it to you, however you want to do it. So thank you very much to Joanne and Kathy Jo for, for backstopping me for this event, because I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that when a bookstore does an offsite event, back in the day when we did it in person, there's somebody leaving the store, or they have to hire somebody who comes and, they buy extra books, and they make an investment of time and money to back an author. And they don't have to do it. And there are fewer and fewer bookstores around here. So we're just, very lucky. It's always an independent bookstore that'll help you. Always, always, always. So I hope you'll support them as well. I mean, Amazon's not going to come and do this. And I really hope that you'll, return the love and support Second Chapter and the other indie bookstores in the area. So that is my soapbox speech, and I'm glad I made it.
So just in passing, I would like to comment, I thought that your characterization of the two older members of the cast of characters in the French Paradox were extraordinarily sympathetic and very realistic.
Thank you.
The grandfather, and then the older lady, whose daughter was not very nice.
Yeah.
But I thought they were very sympathetic, very realistic.
Thank
and
you.
Often older people aren't characterized favorably, and I thought it was just a very wonderful rendition.
Thank you.
Of
Lucie's grandfather is actually based on my husband's uncle. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was a French diplomat, and he was in the resistance, and he lived in Paris, and he traveled as extensively as her grandfather did. And he was the most, he passed away a few years ago, but he was the most, he had just a brilliant mind. He worked on the Marshall Plan. He was just a really, really, really interesting man. And at one point I told him that he was, and he smoked the cigarettes, the Boyas and everything else. I told him he was a carrot, and he was like, okay. I don't know if he thought you knew how to take that or anything, but all of his kids who speak English, they read the books and they really enjoyed them. So, but yeah, he was somebody I love very much.
You should have him visit the Dodona Manor, which is now the Marshall.
No, I mentioned that in a book, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. Marshall's home. Yep. In Leesburg.
Any more?
No.
No. So there are no more questions. Are there any parting? Wait, yes, there is.
So, question. Pepe was aware that he probably doesn't have much time left, but will he be back in a future book for Lucie and Quinn's wedding?
Yes. Yes. Somebody gave me a really good idea. In fact, I think it was Donna at our critique group, and she told me, this is a spoiler, he's supposed to leave. He doesn't. He stays. So he does not. They were going to take him to the airport, and he doesn't go. So he has stayed, and he doesn't have to come back from Paris because he's stayed. So he will be there for the wedding for sure. And he will give her away, which is another spoiler, but it's okay. Anybody else?
I thought there were questions, but they were just yay and aw.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you to the folks who came. I really appreciate it.
All right, any other parting remarks, and then I'll bring this session to a close.
Thank you for hosting me. I really appreciate it. I love coming to the Balch Library every year, and you were a character in one of my earlier books as well. So
yes, I was. Thank you.
Yes, you were. And you may return someday too, because there's so much history that I think the Balch Library.
You were in 2 books.
Yeah.
One in which I was the character, and then in the next one you mentioned the Balch Library. Somebody came and did research.
That's right. Okay, that's right. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, but thank you for having me, and it was lovely.
Well, thank you for joining us today for this delightful conversation with you, Ellen Crosby. And I want to thank you for your time. I know you're very busy. And I want to thank Laura Christensen, the curator of manuscripts here at Thomas Balch Library, for the technical support. For those interested in purchasing an autographed copy of The French Paradox, signed copies are available through the independent bookseller Second Chapter Books, 13 East Washington Street, Middleburg, Virginia. Their telephone number is 540-687-7016 or secondchapterbooks@gmail.com. The book, as you will see, the slide is up. There's 10% off for this event. It's $27.66, which includes the Virginia tax. You can see a picture of the store. There's the address. And I will remind you that this has been recorded and will be available once we process it for viewing. Thank you again.
I'll also personalize the books too. So that's another thing. If you want it to somebody for a birthday or Mother's Day or whatever, Father's Day, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Alexandra.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Take care, everybody. Thank you for coming, all of you.
Okay, so